So today we talk about, it's morning for me, but in this session we'll talk about the giving of gifts. So it's good to consider the question of gift-giving in Confucian cultures because it's also a modern issue for those interacting with the Confucian culture and who may not be familiar with it. Gift-giving is a complex matter with clear rules in Confucian cultures. At the outset, it's important to situate the issue. Confucianism is dominated by the search for humaneness, benevolence, or ren, and this walks hand in hand with the observance of ritual, or li, ritual being the socially recognized behavior which is required to show respect, and humaneness as well. And this forms the social glue, the adhesive which binds society together. To this we must add that the ability to walk the way requires constant self-cultivation and learning through action. There are many ways we learn, all by doing in Confucianism. For example, looking and listening, observing the practice of others, reading and reflecting. These are all ways of learning by doing. Gift-giving is a matter about which scholars write, and there is a wealth of material on the sociology of gift-giving in different societies. It's a matter also for modern law. A specialist in Chinese law and mediation, Bi Chen Go, says that, quoting, gifts are expressive insofar as the giver's intention is to establish friendship, enhance goodwill, and develop close ties, nothing more. Gifts are classified as instrumental when the giver's motivations are goal-driven in order to attain personal gains or favours. Instrumental gifts are popularly known as bribes. So Bi Chen. Many Western countries legislate against the taking of bribes, and the difference between bribes and gifts can be a common cause of misunderstanding. Is it rude to decline? Or if one accepts, is one under an intolerable burden of obligation? I recall once in Malaysia, somebody knocked on my hotel room door one night and said he was a tailor and that he had come to fit me out for a suit. I said that I didn't want a suit, and he said that this was a gift from person X, who knew that I needed a suit. I eventually let him in and succumbed to all the measuring and so on, and accepted the suit, but thereafter felt an intolerable burden of guilt, thinking that I had perhaps been bought for life. The French philosopher Derrida has written on gifts. It's an issue in European philosophy, and he mentions the almost impossible standard of altruism that we in the West secretly have in our minds when it comes to gift-giving. He presents gift-giving as inevitably part of an exchange, and paradoxically suggests that a real gift is impossible. By this he means that a gift where there is no requirement of a return, which is lifted out of a commodity-based exchange system, is actually impossible. He envisages the true gift as an entirely altruistic act, which is impossible. Perhaps only God can do this, give freely without thought of return, though I'm not sure that's where Derrida was heading. It's odd that Confucius barely mentions gifts, though the whole practice was clearly embedded in his culture and must form part of the ritual which he values as the convention which binds us all together. It's an exchange culture which so fascinates the Western analysts of the gift. But in fact, sometimes he emphasizes the refusal of gifts. Let us look firstly at one of the positive things about gift-giving. This is a famous passage. Confucius says that if a young man comes to him asking for instruction and gives a simple gift of dried meats, he would not reject the gift. This seems to imply that the gift was rather more humble than might be expected. Nonetheless, he accepts the obligation to provide some sort of teaching to the student. Two things arise from this. One is that the student was being ritually correct in offering a gift, but it was a humble one, because one presumes of a lack of means. Confucius recognizes the gift and deems it to be appropriate in spite of this, thereby making the point that the gift culture was malleable and open to interpretation, but also that knowledge should be given freely, not tied to the giving of lavish gifts. So he who knows the way knows how to handle gifts. We're told that the master, quoting, did not kowtow on receiving gifts from friends, even those as lavish as a horse and carriage, with the sole exception of sacrificial meat. So clearly, Confucius had a well-established practice for gift exchange and must have had a developed philosophy, one which is not outlined in any detail. He gave special attention to a gift of sacrificial meat, so obviously there's a hierarchy among gifts in his thinking. But on another occasion, Confucius refuses a gift, this time a lavish gift, and in the background to this he warns about personal profit. Acting with an eye to personal profit, he says, will cause resentment. And he says in the Analects 4:11 that only a petty person has an eye to personal gain. So the motive of personal profit is deemed to be a low-level activity. But he does also stress that the pursuit of profit might cause resentment. And in this way he has an eye to the social harmony issue. Causing resentment is as important as the moral issue itself. So a Confucian society would be expected to look at the impact of profit-making on social harmony. For Confucius, wealth and position gained through inappropriate means are nothing more than clouds which float away. There is a passage of Mencius, who was the explainer for Confucius, in which Confucius is said to have refused certain gifts. In fact, this passage, Mencius to be, contains a number of such examples, and it is not just about gift-giving and rejecting, but about the topic of refusal to play the game, refusal to compromise principles, refusal in order to appear independent, the refusal to be bought. In fact, this theme of refusal is a very important one, and refusal is a more general form of opting out or expressing opposition. Refusal includes refusing gifts, but also involves other forms of refusal, such as refusing an invitation to visit the king. In one example mentioned, Mencius accepted one gift of 70 yi, but refused another of 100 yi, giving the reason that the smaller giver gave a utilitarian reason for the gift, that as he was travelling, he would need the money to arm himself and hire protection. The more generous gift had no such rationale and looked like an attempt to buy him. Rejecting a handsome gift is a big decision to make, particularly if the giver is powerful and influential. And there is a view that gift rejection, as practiced by Confucius and Mencius, was an assertion of independence from power and a warning shot across the bows in a gift-oriented culture. So there seemed to be an emphasis on gift rejection as a sign of moral fortitude. But there's also an interesting passage on gift management in the Analects in Book 17:1. Young Huo wanted Confucius to come and visit him, and since Confucius did not oblige, sent the gift of a suckling pig. Presumably this was a handsome gift. Confucius waited strategically for a time when young Huo would not be home, and then went to visit him to acknowledge the gift, but was foiled in this because he ran into him in the street. Young Huo then took advantage of the chance meeting and spoke eloquently to Confucius about hoarding the assets in his country, one of these assets being a man of great wisdom who repeatedly misses the opportunity to serve his country. The asset was, of course, Confucius. Confucius was persuaded and said, apparently reluctantly, all right, I will serve in office then." So this final passage illustrates the fact that Confucius did not want to engage in the gift exchange protocol with young Huo, but he felt it necessary to respond to the gift. He chose to avoid an encounter with the giver, and this gives us an insight into how he might have managed some gifts. The visit was to preserve the protocol, but was designed to escape the reciprocation inevitably required in the end. That came unstuck, because he ran into young Huo in the street, and he did reciprocate in the end because he was appropriately persuaded to take up office in the kingdom. Again, we see the subtlety and malleability of the gift exchange culture in Confucius' own practice, even though he doesn't theorize about it. And it's not adequate to characterize his approach to gifts as purely negative. Some want to say this, dominated by the rejection of gifts. Some would emphasize his radicalism by emphasizing his rejection of gifts, as this makes him more subversive. I don't doubt that he was subversive in his emphasis on ethical behaviour, and must have been a thorn in the side for the authorities. But in this particular context, his management of gifts is infinitely subtle. Gift-giving was an opportunity, within the framework of ritual and obligation, to engage in a subtle dance of acceptance and refusal. Thank you again for being with me, and next time we will look at the question of women in Confucius.